short and special lecture on the great Nobel Prize winning poet Seamus Heaney. Yes, guys, a very important poet for our all exams like TGT, PGT, and NET. Let us look a little bit about Seamus Heaney as a writer. So, guys, this is an excerpt from the a short biography of Seamus Heaney from Norton Anthology. Yes, 20th century writers, Norton Anthology has some very important poems selected of Seamus Heaney. So let's look at the biography of Seamus Heaney. So the great Irish poet belongs from Northern Ireland, also known as Ulster, and he has his schooling from, you can say, the county Derry, which was bordered on one side by a stream that marked the frontier with the largely Catholic Irish Republic. So he won scholarship first to the St. Columba's College and then Catholic boarding school, and then eventually to Queen's Victoria University in Belfast. So there he became one of the very extraordinary group of Northern Irish poets from both Protestant and Catholic backgrounds, including Michael Longley and Derek Mahon, who read, discussed, and spurred on one another's works. So he taught also at Queen's University before moving in 1972 to the Irish Republic, where he became a citizen and a full-time writer. He was also a Bolston professor of rhetoric and oratory at Harvard and professor of poetry. This is very important, at Oxford. So he remained professor of poetry at Oxford from 1989 to 1995. And we can see here that he also very importantly won the Nobel Prize in the year 1995. So guys, let's look at some important works that he has written. So this is a very important excerpt from Britannica.com, and it has the complete works of Seamus Heaney, guys. So here you can see that Heaney's first poetry collection was the prize-winning Death of a Naturalist, which came out in the year 1966. A very important question, guys. In this book, and also in the books like Door into the Dark, which came out in 1969, he wrote in a traditional style about a passing way of life and that of a domestic rural life in Northern Ireland. In Wintering Out 1972 and North 1975, he began to encompass subjects as violence in Northern Ireland and contemporary Irish experience, though he continued to view his subject through a mythic and mystical filter. It's a very important word for Seamus Heaney, guys. He is basically mythic poet. In his poetry, there is a lot of Irish myth that he uses, the Catholic Northern Irish myth, and he is also a mystic. Okay, and the later works included some very important works like Field Work, Station Island, Hall Lantern, Seeing Things, The Spirit Level. Okay, and his Open Ground selected poems was published in 1998. It's a very important collection, guys. This one, Electric Ride, District and Circle. He returned to Ireland in his youth. The Poetry in Human Chain, 2010, reflects on death, loss, and regret and memory. He also wrote essays on poetry and poets such as William Wordsworth, Gerard Manley Hopkins, if you remember, the great Victorian prosodist who wrote The Nun of the Doucheland and The Pied Beauty. He is also known as the inventor of curtal sonnet, if you remember, 10.5 line sonnets, right? So William Hopkins, Gerard Manley Hopkins was a great Victorian prosodist. Then Elizabeth Bishop also, if you remember, a great, you can say, experimenter of poetry. So some of the essays have appeared in the work Preoccupation, Selected Prose, and Finders Keepers, Selected Prose. Collection of his lectures, this is very important, guys, at Oxford was published as the Redress of Poetry in 1995. He also produced translation, and this is a very important point, can be asked in our NET English, GATE English, all the papers, and that is including the Cure at Troy, which is Heaney's version. This is very important, of Sophocles, Philoctetus, and the Midnight Verdict 1993, which contains selections from Ovid's Metamorphoses and from Coet and Man Oike, that is the Midnight Court, a work by the 18th century Irish writer Brian Merriman. Okay, one very important thing about Heaney is that this is a very important question already asked in our NET English, that Heaney's international bestseller was the translation of the Old English epic poem Beowulf. If you remember the great Old English epic uh, Beowulf, which came out in the year 1999. It became an unexpected international bestseller, and also his burial at Thebes in 2004. He gave Sophocles' Antigone, a contemporary relevance. So in a way, he kind of adapted the great play Antigone by Sophocles, a classical author, uh, into the contemporary relevance. Okay, so this is just a cursory glance at his major works. Not exactly major works, but the chronological list of all the works of Seamus Heaney. Now let's look at what Norton Anthology says about him, generally about his poems, and we will also look a specific detail into some of his enduring poems. Now, here you can see here that in this excerpt from Norton Anthology, you can see here Digging. It is placed appropriately as the first poem of his first book. Heaney defined his territory. He dug into his memory, uncovering with his father and then going deeper his grandfather. The idea of poetry as an archaeological process, it can be asked, guys, of recovery took on a darker cast after the eruption of internecine violence. That is, this is a very important word for Seamus Heaney, guys, and that is he is also referred as the poet of troubles. Okay, now troubles refers to kind of civil war or the spurts of violence in Northern Ireland, starting from 1969 and culminating to this you can make your note in 1972 as Bloody Sunday, where killing of 13 Catholic civilians by British paratroopers during a civil right march in Derry, now the place where he belongs. Across several volumes, especially North, we have already read about North. Heaney wrote a series of grim bog poems. Now, please do remember Heaney for bog poems. Now, bog is a kind of marshy land. In Hindi, we call it as daldal. Okay, so these bogs have a certain historical and mythological relevance also in Northern Ireland, and there were preserved Iron Age corpses which were discovered in the peat, the big, you can say, dugouts of Northern Europe and Ireland. In these poems, he sees the bog as a memory bank, very important, or unconscious that preserves everything thrown into it, including the victims of ritual killings. Very important. In one of the poems, he compares Ireland with, you can say, an archaic image of Irish mother. He views contemporary violence, this is very important, through the lens of ancient myths, sacrifices, and feuds, an oblique approach that gives his poetry about the troubles an unusual depth and resonance. Very important. So, guys, let's look at the text of two of his very important poems. This is directly taken from, as you can see, the website Poetry Foundation, a very important website, guys, for all of us for the authentic texts. You can go always for this website. So poetryfoundation.org has this very important text of Digging, where you can see the opening between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rest. So squat is like, like in this position. Snug as a gun, snug. If you can see here, the word play between snug and gun. Snug is kind of, you can say, a tool to dig out the ground. Under my window, a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into graveling ground. My father digging, I look down. So he's comparing his profession as a poet with that of his father, who has this profession of a farmer. So he's in this very classical poem, Digging, and often anthologized poem of Heaney. And look at the last few lines: the cold smell of potato mold, the squelch, the slap. All these are Irish word of soggy peat, if you remember. The curt cuts of an edge through living roots awaken in my head, but I have no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rest, I will dig with it. So look at the note of optimism also in his poems. He uses poetry as a note of optimism. And if you look at his another poem, Death of a Naturalist, a very important poem again. So here he takes the image of flax dam festered in the heart of the townlet, green and heavy-headed. Flax had rotted there, weighted down by huge sods. So you can see here the image of the marshy lands. It's one of the very important bog poems. Okay, and it's also considered as a classical Irish poem of Seamus Heaney. Okay, so if you look at the end lines, that poised like mud grenades, their blunt heads farting. So look at the word farting and the image, very repulsive image. He's talking about the frogs. In the poem is all about frogs and how they copulate and how eventually the uh, looking at the copulation or reproduction of frogs create a very disturbing and repulsive image, and how it leads to the death of a naturalist. So very interesting image. As sickened, turned and ran. The great slime kings were gathered there for vengeance, and I know that if I dipped my hand, the spawn would clutch it. So a very disturbing and repulsive image you can see here. Okay, so this is just a quick excerpt of the poems, two very important poems of Seamus Heaney. Now let's go back into this short description of Heaney. So here Heaney talks about the book, The Bog People. It's a book by Danish archaeologist P.V. Glob, and it was published in translation in 1969, the year the killing started. That is the troubles I am sharing here, a very important, excerpt from here. So you can take a screenshot here, and here he says, this is Heaney writing about the Bog people, very important, and disturbing images of Bog. So in the Bog poems, Heaney reflects on the poet's responsibility to write about the dead, yet to do so without prettifying or exploiting them. So in this poem, his historical suffering, beauty, and atrocity, all the time, there is always the conflict between the opposites. Okay. So the result is a tough-minded witnessing, he says. And you can also mark this poem as the Grobel Man, very important poem. So from the late 1970s, Heaney then started elegizing specific victims of trouble, such as his acquaintance Louis O'Neill. A very important poem, Casualty, guys. You can go for a deep meaning of a deep reading of this poem, as well as personal losses such as natural death of his mother, clearances. This has also been asked. Clearances is an elegy by Heaney on his mother. He also wrote poems about domestic love, such as The Skunk and the Sharpening Stone. Heaney was thus both a private poet, skillfully kneading grief, love, and wonder into poems about his family and his humble origins, and also a public poet, affirming his affinities with Catholic civil rights movements which have struggled for centuries against British and Protestant domination. Even in his public poetry, he refused slogans, journalistic report, and political PTs, scrutinizing instead the well springs. So all these things are there. So he responding obliquely to the destruction of the Twin Towers on September 1, very important event, means very important historical modern event, you can say, September 11, if you remember, 2001. He reworked a 2000-year-old Latin ode by Horace in Anything Can Happen, and the bombings of the London Underground subway on July 7, 2005 reverberate in District and Circle. These are the poems we have already seen that he has written. As an Irishman writing in the language of the British Empire, he translated Gaelic poetry, renewed specifically Irish traditions such as the Aisling vision poems. He also steeped in English literary canon, drawing on British poetry from Beowulf, I have already told you about this, to the works of Wordsworth, Hopkins, and Ted Hughes. Straddling a multiplicity of divisions, transubstantiating crisscross feelings into unexpected images and intricate sonorities, Heaney's works has been embraced by popular audiences for its style, yet also admired by poets and academic critics for its. Now, these are two very important qualities: lyrical subtlety and rigorous technique. Okay. Formerly, his poetry ranged from free verse, the clipped lines and unrhymed quatrains of bog poems, to more traditional forms. Now, technical points are coming up, okay, such as modified terza rima. So, he has used terza rima form in Station Island, and the sonnet sequences, clearances, very important. Clearances is a sonnet. His poems are, you can say, are earthy. Earthy means made from the very much the earth, and matter of fact, that means very precise, saturated with physical textures, sights, smells, and sounds of farm life. And they are also visionary in up by hope and spirit, enacting penitential pilgrimages and unbridled imaginings. Heaney's poetry is both earthbound and airborne, free and formed, public and private, helps explain why he is seen by many as the most gifted English language poet of his generation. So, guys, this was a bit about Seamus Heaney. I hope you like this section of our net English preparation, where we are focusing on contemporary Indian writers. Please do keep, going for these writers. I will very soon issue a list of the major authors that we are going to cover under this special series on the Norton Anthology writers, where I am taking a biography of these writers from there, and I'm trying to explain the writers, and also trying to explain the important poems of the major writers. Okay, so keep liking, sharing, and keep also subscribing the channel Knowledge Junction 2.0. And after this success of GATE, where I managed to score All India rank 38, I hope that many of the new students for Net English will turn up at our KJ and will go for the online course, where you will definitely get a very accurate, pinpointed, result oriented guidance. So, see you there in my next lecture. Thank you.